Hey everybody, it's Krishanti with Krishanti.com talking about psychic development and spiritual and personal growth. And today I have my friend Debra Lynne Katz here, and we're going to talk all about psychic work, learning how to be psychic, and everything in between. So welcome, Debra, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Krishanti. It's so fun to be here with you too.
It's exciting, really. And I've known Debra for well over a decade. She was my original psychic teacher and mentor, and I just love working with her. I read all of her books and I use the practices that she taught me every day in my psychic work. So, Debra, what I'd like to ask you, first of all, is how did you get into doing psychic work, and how did you discover that being psychic is something that everyone can tap into?
Sure. Well, I have an identical twin sister named Amy, and when we were really young, we would have all kinds of experiences together that I'd say were telepathic, where we knew what the other was thinking when we were at a distance, or we would basically repeat everything the other person was going to say or think about. So I would be about to say something to someone else and she would say it. And this happened so often that it was almost a race to see who could speak first. And so we noticed something was going on. And at the same time, we would have different experiences where we would see the same spirits in the house, like figures standing in my or kind of floating in my parents' doorway. And like I would see that first and not say anything to her. And then she would tell me about it. So we were able to independently verify some of these just kind of odd things going on. And we had a really strong interest in this, but we had no idea how we could actually get control over it, or we never imagined that we would be able to. So it really wasn't until I was in my late 20s or so, like around the age of 27 or so, that I came across a couple clairvoyant training programs. And this was already like about 25 years ago or so. And at first I didn't know anything about them or what was possible. I just knew that there were a lot of people in these schools that seemed to be able to see not just things about my life and my past, but into even my visualizations of my meditations, and where I could easily visualize something, or when I was having trouble visualize something, why that was, and then trace it to something that had happened in my past. And so I was really just so fascinated. At that time, I was working as a federal probation officer, and it was a really stressful job, and I worked really long hours, but just about every night I would go and do readings and practice like nonstop for about 13 months. And at that point, I just knew that this was what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up leaving my job, moving to the Philippines to study with different faith healers and energy healers, and pretty much I've been on this track ever since.
That's amazing. And what would you say is the best way to get started on the path towards developing your own psychic skills? If someone, if someone has an interest and like doesn't know where to begin. And if you wouldn't mind just talking about you talked about you enrolling in psychic development programs, but could you speak a little bit about your trilogy of books that you created as well?
Yeah, definitely. Well, what happened was, again, several years ago, once I just spent hundreds of hours practicing reading different people, and also doing what's called remote viewing, where I would be tuning into different locations and objects and looking for things and people and pets and things like that. So I did a combination of things. And after a while, people were always saying like, wow, you're so gifted and talented. And I would tell them, please don't think of it like that, because really I know that the only thing that sets me apart is that I've practiced a lot. I mean, I learned some techniques and then I practiced a lot. So then they would say, well, how can I do this? And it just got to the point where I was spending so much time individually just giving people advice about it, that I thought I really need to put this in a book, because the methods I learned learned were verbal. They weren't documented in writing. So that's really what prompted me to write my first book, which is called You Are Psychic: The Art of Clairvoyant Reading and Healing. And I certainly did not intend to come here to plug it. But that being said, it is, when people say, you know, how can I get started? There are some very practical steps that people can do. They involve first certain meditations, and some meditations lend themselves to this work more so than others. So if you want, we can talk about that, because I know you're familiar with them as well. And so first meditations to get your visual faculties going, and then further steps for actually knowing how to direct your mind to call forth the information. You know, everybody, just about everybody, has occasional spontaneous psychic experiences, but most people don't just have spontaneous clairvoyant experiences, and we can talk about that too. But the thing people a lot of times don't realize is that there's these very simple visualizations paired with tuning into specific people or targets. You really need to have a goal of what you want to get information about. And so my books, my first book and then my second book, Extraordinary Psychic, really helps people know how to get started. And then there's further things they can do beyond that.
That's interesting, because after my first clairvoyant reading that I talked about to you guys who are watching this video, I've talked about it before. My first official reading was with 2 clairvoyant students at a school in Boulder, Colorado. And that was it really was life-changing, because they did energy work. They really cracked me open, and my spirit came out, and like it sort of, everything just started to flow. And then I found the book, The Psychic Pathway by Sonia Choquette, which I devoured and adored. And I love her teachings. And then I found Debra's book, You Are Psychic: The Art of Clairvoyant Reading. And I loved that book. I read it. Everything like made sense to me. Like it's like really a guidebook, the way you present things. It takes you, you know what I mean? It's like if you just jump in without a map, like you don't know where you're going. But you have all these exercises, and that's when I decided I wanted to train with you personally, because I just loved the book so much. And I think I had a reading with you and one of your students and the student was actually describing at one point what I was seeing outside of my office building window, which was so amazing. Like, how is she seeing what I am seeing right now? This is so cool. I'm like, that's it. I'm training with you. And that was so much fun. We had a lot of fun in that training program. And I did what you did, which is just started practicing every single day, that diligent practice. And I think what people don't talk about a lot too is how important it is to focus when we're doing this psychic work. Like, it's like holding a focus and staying focused on what you're doing and not letting your mind get distracted, right? Is that a big part of it, you think, too, Debra?
Oh yeah, it's huge. Now, I would say the mind can get distracted, but it's how much discipline do we have to bring it back to where it needs to focus. So the mind will definitely, that's what it does. That's what people that study attention, cognitive psychologists and scientists, they find that people's minds, for anything, that it never stays just focused on one thing. It's always moving off task momentarily. So what happens at that point? You know, do you get upset? Do you go on to something else? Or do you say, no, my mind just wandered, I'm going to put it back? Or now I just got a flash of information, I just got a little tidbit or a symbol, but now I need to refocus it to extract more information. And it's that constant.
What I find it's so common with students, and we'll talk about your group classes too, and what you're doing, and I'm doing one-on-one trainings like you used to do way back when, is that people will see something, like you do the meditation. By the way, guys, I have the Keystone sort of psychic clairvoyant meditation for free on my website. It's grounding and centering and running your own energy. That's like the classic, right, Debra? people will get like something, like I'll see something, oh, I don't know what it means, and then just give up. Like this random weird thing, no idea, well, forget it. But if you hone in on it and you just kind of unpack it, and one thing leads to the other, right?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, a lot of times people are discouraged because I find the biggest problem is people have all these misconceptions about how information is supposed to appear or how it's supposed to come to them. And there's these expectations that, it's just going to be like they turn on the TV set and everything is like nicely packaged, in a whole storyline, and it's all there and it all makes perfect sense. And their visions are crystal clear. And so these are the expectations, and that's not how it works. So, and we can get more into that, but because of that, they then get discouraged or think that they can't do it. And now I do think it is somewhat similar to watching TV, but it would be more like if you had the TV on and just for a second, or change the channel for a second and then changed it again and then turned it off for a second and then turn it back on for a second. So it's getting just very brief bursts of information. But then, like the TV, you could go back to the channel that you were looking at, but the image isn't going to just stay up there. So it's revisualizing the image and then probing it some more. And it's also, I kind of get an image of like a tunnel that you have to dig through, and or a path. Like when you walk through an overgrown path, you have to walk through it many times and sometimes chop apart the bushes or whatever, but you have to do a clearing in it. And if you get familiar enough with that path and you've walked through it enough, something starts to change, and then it's just easy to go through there. And that's how I look at our psychic development. So when people are just absolutely brand new to all of this, it like everything's overgrown, it's untended, it's scary, it's confusing, they don't know, which way to turn. But over time, just that like familiarity really starts to clear the way, and then the vision is much clearer at the end. It's
Everybody's is cool. It is so cool. And what's interesting to me too is how everybody's psychic skills kind of present just a little bit differently, because we're all different. So someone might pick up on something that is a trigger for them, or something within their consciousness, like a matching picture, as we call it in clairvoyant terms, whereas someone else might not see that and might see something different that matches something within their own psyche, right?
Yeah. It's like if you came over to visit me at my house,
which I will soon, I hope.
I hope so. So yeah, like one person, we live in between two rivers with the river in our front yard and backyard. So someone would come over and they'd run to the water, whereas someone else would see my husband's old Chevy outside and they would run over to look at the Chevy, whereas someone else might want to come over and just look at what is in my refrigerator, if they're hungry. It depends, or someone else is going to need to use the bathroom. So people are always interested in different things. And so, and sometimes it's interest, sometimes it's out of pure need. And so that's very true when it gets to using your clairvoyance to read people. So that's why if we're doing a group reading, which is it's always fascinating to see what information everyone comes up with that's similar to each other. But then there'll also be people reading different aspects of the person. It's like that analogy of a bunch of guys touching an elephant, a blind man touching an elephant, and they feel the tail or the trunk or the feet and get a different impression. So we're getting bits of information and then we're putting them all together in one whole package.
That is so cool. Another thing I think it's interesting that I have been thinking a lot about lately is how you can think something means something, and this is more for me with clairaudience, and it can mean something completely different. So for example, I'm working with someone now and helping her access the Akashic records. in my mind, I always think of the Akashics as like a hall, and they talk about it as like a hall of books. And the Akashic record is like a book that you read that talks about your soul's path through all these different lifetimes. And I was talking to my guide about it. I was trying to get more information, like what's an easier way to get there? Like, can anybody go? Like, how do we do it all? And my guide was like, why don't you think of it more as a actual record that plays the music of a soul's life? And that totally made it like, oh, it's so different, but it's also accurate.
Yeah, that's so cool. So that's like you could say your overlay of how to, the information is there about how to conceptualize it. And then depending on how you're conceptualizing it, you can guide yourself. So if you think of it like a book, you could visualize a book for someone else, have them say their name. And then what I like to do is first ask for colors, because energy shows up as colors. So you look at the page for that particular person for their book, and then you see a color, and then you probe that color, and you'll start getting images for that person. But that's so cool. I've never thought of it as if it was a record, but probably in doing that, maybe then you're going to get more auditory because you listen to records. So you could listen to it. You can maybe also use a color method, what color is coming off of it, what kind of music is coming from it. So you can just play around and even, make up some techniques and then see how those work.
Right.
So there's endless ways it's like we're trying to encapsulate information in some kind of physical form, because that's the only way that our physical bodies can process it all. So the information's everywhere, but yeah, how do we encapsulate it, create it, make it into something material, and then work with it from there? Not that it's going to be, as material as everything else, but don't you find that after doing this for a while that you think of energy as physical and material?
Yeah.
Like it's not just out there. It is something material. It's just less dense.
Right. For sure. Absolutely. It's fascinating how much more sensitive to energy doing this work makes everyone really. And another aspect of it too is if we can realize just how minute our consciousness really is, and be open to like an expansion, like to having information flow that we may not comprehend yet, but hopefully we'll be able to as we advance and grow and continue with this psychic and spiritual work, right?
Yeah, and that's why it is very much about, I think, having enough experience under your belt, and the experience is within the practice is also then observing what happens with yourself. So as you say, at first you think of not just this work, but yourself and life in a certain way, and then you start to see that things are not how you thought they were. And then at the same time, you also start having changes in your own body, because this work is really about discovering your whole, I never like the word just energy or energy body, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense to people. But once you start working in this realm, it's like you ignite it, you stimulate it, and you start having new sensations run through your body, like vibrations, all different sensations that do have to do with energy movement. Because when we're using our clairvoyance, we're seeing energy. When we're seeing the energy fields of everybody, energy fields of everyone around us, and energy fields of the world around us. And that makes us then activate these energetic systems. So then we're feeling our bodies and experiencing other people's bodies too. So we start to feel other people's emotions more, or at least we come to realize how we've already been feeling people's emotions or body sensations and didn't even realize it. And that's, I think for both of us, that was a big eye opener to realize how we'd been doing that all our lives and how it really affected us, but we didn't realize that's what was really going on.
Yeah, so true. I remember when I was working with you, I was still in corporate America in marketing and in an office. I remember I started really noticing on Mondays, the vibe would be like so down and everyone would be like, and then on Friday, it would be like, hooray, happy day. It's like to feel that, to be in this soup of like depression and then like elation was fascinating. But
Yeah.
I'd like to move on to the next kind of question, which is, what in your experience are the most common blocks or difficulties that people have when they start opening up and developing these innate psychic abilities that we all have within us? Like kind of what gets in the way for most people?
Well, I would say, first of all, it is really helpful to meditate. And while any form of meditation is great, I do find that certain visualization oriented meditations are best for this. And so, of course, the hardest thing initially is just getting oneself to sit down and be still long enough. For some people, even sitting there for 5 minutes is a monumental task. And some people just can't do it. They just cannot sit still long enough. And then that makes it really hard to be able to do further psychic work. Now, the good news is that it's just like running. You would not expect someone who has never run to go run a 20-mile marathon, right? Like if someone hasn't ever run, even just walking a mile is a big deal. So
Right.
the good news is even if it's hard to get oneself to leave the house and walk a mile, which is something I'm having a little trouble with lately. I have no trouble, sitting in meditation or doing readings for hours, but taking a walk can be hard. But for other people, it's just the opposite. So sitting for 10 minutes and again, the meditations that we do that are in my book and that we both do in our training, they're very active. So the good news is that you don't have to just sit there with a clear mind. You can do these visualizations and they're very simple, but just for 10 minutes. And so usually what I do with my students is the first week of class, like in a typical 12-week class with our level 1 class, the first week I just tell students to do the meditation for 10 minutes. And if they have done that, then the next week, okay, let's go to 15 minutes. Now we're building up to an hour. And while it would be great if they could then do an hour a day, for several months, at least to see what happens, that's really the key, is that I want to bring people to a place where they get to experience what happens when you do these meditations for a whole hour, because sometimes there's a difference even at the 45-minute mark and the hour mark. And so people that only meditate for 5, 20, even 30 minutes usually don't get to experience what happens at the hour mark. And it's not that anything that dramatic happens. It's just that usually that's when they finally hit the place that they were hoping to hit within a minute, which is suddenly you realize, oh, it's quiet in here. It's still in here in my own mind. It's like I didn't even realize it, but suddenly everything is just still. But it takes that long. And then if let's say you go for a month and stop doing it, you might have to build up. You're not going to have that same difficulty, but you might, hit some of the same things again. But at least what I want people to walk away with is knowing that if they are stressed out in their life, if they are really upset, if they don't know what to do with themselves, that they can use these tools to make things easier, no matter how upset someone is. And again, the key is, if you're so upset, how do you get yourself into that chair to do it? But the more you do it, the more you know that if you're all alone, if you have no one to turn to or no one who can give you good advice, that you always have a way to calm yourself down and reach a level of peace, even if you're not, doing these exercises daily. Some people are in a place in their life where meditating every day, several times a day is fine, especially if they're single, they have their space to themselves. People with lots of kids, or even a single kid, especially right now with COVID and everything going on, that we don't want to put stress on them to think there's one additional thing they need to add on to their busy schedule. But that being said, when you start to do these techniques, it almost creates extra time, because even though it's not that you're necessarily getting like realizations right during the meditation itself, but it gives you a level of clarity so that you'll just end up focusing on what it is you need to focus on, and all the other stuff that you thought you needed to do in order, to just be okay. For example, like if somebody wants to apply for a job, they might think they have to go apply for 100 different jobs. But after taking the time to meditate, which might seem a little bit frivolous, they do it. And then when they're done, they just go and apply for a couple jobs. And those are the ones that end up to be, the ones that they would have gotten called for, and the other ones, they can just let go of. So it really helps clear the pathway to have your own voice. And then you can take more intelligent actions, so to speak.
So in summary too, and thank you for all of that, but in summary to that question, one of the biggest blocks is just not wanting to sit down and meditate, or not doing the work every day.
That's a huge block. And then I would say, what would be another one? Well, people's emotions get in the way. So some people are better at managing emotions, which again, meditating can help. Some people are just more emotional than others, and there's ways that you can overcome that, or not totally overcome it, but mitigate that, I would say, through where you're positioning yourself within your body, where you're centering yourself in relation to your chakras. Or if you don't really understand or believe in chakras, you can think of it like you can center yourself up here, or you can center yourself lower, or in your heart center, and those will have different impacts on your emotions. So that's another thing in both our trainings. I know we work with people is how to not have the emotions get in the way. The other thing is people, their logic gets in the way. And this happens for everyone.
Oh, that's a huge block. Yeah, because you think like your analytical mind is like, well, it has to be like this has to be the answer, but you can't listen to that in the psychic space because it doesn't help. I had a student that was maddening. He's wonderful, but it was maddening because he would switch off the psychic stuff and then just start giving advice. Like, people aren't going to come to you for a psychic reading if you're just giving street advice. They want you to be psychic, and your street advice may be sensible, but it's not psychic.
Exactly.
Such a big choice.
Yeah, and that's where I find students really benefit, because as you know, like there's all kinds of cues to let us know that a student is in their analytic mind versus in their psychic space. And that's something that takes quite a while to recognize, but when we start to observe that, we can point it out and say, no, okay, let's take a little break here, and now let's go back to the clairvoyant methods. And that's what I love about clairvoyance. Because if you're only using like your sense of knowing, which is very important, but just spontaneous knowing, which is called claircognizance, or even hearing, these are important skills, but sometimes they're very easily confused with just analytic thoughts. But when you're relying on pictures, which clairvoyance is really information in the form of pictures, it circumvents the logic part, and it sends you right back into your psychic space. So there's definite things that we can do to help students so that they can get out of the logical mind. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to fluctuate back and forth. And that doesn't mean that we don't, as readers, sometimes go there too. But at least when somebody is trained and they know the cues to pay attention to, they can recognize themselves after a little bit, like, oh, okay, I fell out of my clairvoyant space. Now I need to find my way back there. And that's one of the values, I would say, of training, and also a really big challenge. And some people are definitely more cerebral and analytical than others. I do find that my straight men, male students, are the most challenging to work with because they're just so attached to the logic. But once you can help them with that, they do really well.
Cool. Good. And I want to ask you something really important too that I don't think people talk about enough, which is the dangers of doing psychic work if one is not properly trained in a formal training program, or reading like manuals, like what your books essentially are. Like, what can happen if you just sort of try to dabble without a guide?
Well, I would say that one of the things that's really important is even, well, it's just tips like what I'm about to give here. So it's really important that people keep their energy high when they're doing this work. So
Yeah.
because they don't want to attract just negative things, whether we say negative entities or energies. And and this is true for any level of person who's really doing any work, but especially with psychic work. And so and especially like where mediumship is concerned. So sometimes people want to jump into mediumship immediately. And actually, I teach a 12-week mediumship class,
I
but
noticed you've been getting more into that too.
yeah, but students need to do the clairvoyant training first, because that's where it's going to give them all the tools that they need to protect themselves, to ground, to be aware that people need to know what their baseline is. They need to know by baseline, what is their own energy? How does it feel to be themselves and in their body and in the best space they can be in. And once they can even recognize that, which some people can't, because they've always lived with families or different people that had a lot of negativity and stress going on. So there's adults that don't really know what it feels like to be in their own space. They're just constantly in other people's homes and energy fields. And so they don't know how it feels to be themselves. So if you don't know how to feel, how it is to just be in your own energy and space and vibration, then you're not going to know when you've departed from it, or you're not going to as easily be able to tell when you're tuning into other negative energies. So that, it would kind of be like if you're already all dirty and grimy, then how do you even notice when, other dirt and grime came on you? But if you're sparkly clean and in a great space, and then something suddenly changes, you could recognize that. And then you want to have the tools of how to deal with that. And how to deal with that is most of the time very, very easy, but people just don't realize that. And so people need to understand that first, and then they can, get more experimental with, whether it's with mediumship or out-of-body travel or shamanic journeying. And, not that, of course, lots of people do these things, and they just dabble in them. And a lot of times they're totally fine. It's just, why not have the extra tools to know what you're dealing with before you, go out and do that. It's like for pilots, they can learn in the plane, but why not go to ground school first, learn some things, and then they're going to be much better off when they actually get into the plane and get up in the air.
That's a great metaphor. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important that we talk about that and that we're aware of our vibration and keeping it, knowing how to keep it high consistently and knowing what to stay away from and what to kind of go into or cleave to with psychic stuff. But that's a great point to lead into. If you could talk about your formal training program. I noticed that you have different levels, because when we worked together one-on-one, it was more like focused on me individually, which is what I do with people now. But so in your program, you have a level 1, 2, and 3, and then that from there they can go into the mediumship or remote viewing, right? So
Yeah, and actually people can do the remote viewing or the clairvoyant track at the same time, and they don't have to wait that long to go into the mediumship. But basically what happened was, over the years, I saw what seemed to work better for people over time. So for example, and sorry, there's a little background noise here going on.
I can't really hear much.
Okay. Okay. My husband just walked into the room. Sorry. So yes. First, there is the core techniques of learning how to ground and center yourself, and like I said, recognize your own space. And then it's also learning the techniques so you can start to practice on people. And so what I always want to do in any class I teach is I do want to bring people to a level of independence as quickly as possible. So I try to give them everything they would need so they could start practicing doing readings on their own. So for example, in my 12-week class, I look at it by the time of the 12 weeks, they shouldn't need me anymore. You know, they can go practice, and there's still going to be resources that they could dial into, such as practice groups if they need that. But I have many students who halfway through class, they're already practicing on other people by themselves. Some are even ready to launch a professional business at the end of the 12 weeks. Now, I would say that is rare, and that happens mostly with people that are very outgoing and just went nuts during the class and found like 100 people to read. That, you know, that you probably found that with some students too.
That myself, I remember it counted. I took notes too of every person, every reading until the 100th one.
And you got through those really quickly.
Yeah, because I had this burning desire to apply it and to practice. And I actually practiced without charging for 2 years to make sure I was good enough. Because the last thing you want to do is get into this and then BS with people, you know, or not be really, really good at getting the information that they need to hear. Because people aren't coming for readings when they're feeling great and dandy. They usually come when they need you to help lift them up and help them figure out the path to take and all that stuff. So you want to be, I believe you want to be excellent if you want to do this, because you're there helping people out of the trenches, right?
And that is really the attitude of most students. I mean, I even have an assistant right now, and we've been working together for 5 years. And she was just yesterday, in fact, she was like, you know, I have a lot of people that want to do exchanges, and I'm just kind of feeling like I might be ready to start charging. And I'm like, what? You've been doing this for 5 years and I didn't even realize that she wasn't doing readings professionally. I was like, yes, you need to be doing that, because, you know, after a while, everyone will say, you know, gosh, I feel like you just spent an hour and a half with me. I feel like I want to give something back. And she said, yeah, exactly. People have been saying that to me, and it takes time and energy. But yeah, the worst thing is, no, it's really hard to do readings if you don't know what you're doing and you're not confident. So again, it takes a while to build, and most people are not like yourself. Like they might start to feel comfortable practicing on their own, like around outside of class and practice groups, like maybe around week, 9 or 10 or so. And some people are slower with that. So what I do in my level 2 class is I really look at it as, while it's not essential, because again, the last thing I want is for people to get dependent on me, because the clairvoyant program that I went through, that school I went to 25 years ago, they really did try to get people to be dependent on the school and think that they should really only do readings within the school. So I very much do not want to repeat that. But in my level 2 class, what I do is I bring in more volunteers for people to read. So in the first class, they're mostly the students are reading each other. In level 2, they're reading volunteers, and I purposefully bring in challenging cases. So if someone has a mental health issue, if they have a severe physical issue, or a really challenging relationship issue, just as in my normal correspondence with people, I'll say, hey, why don't you join in on the level 2 class and the students can read you. And then so the students get exposure to these difficult cases, but they're still able to read in small groups. Usually, and then they will do readings and healings, which I know you've come in to receive at different times.
It's really nice to get read and get a healing by a group of people. And I found too, the people that you work with are that you attract tend to be like wonderful, special people. It's always exciting to meet like one of your students or former students.
Yeah, I take that for granted now, but I have to say that just about 98% of the students are all like on that vibration where they're the most caring people that one could ever imagine. Like they only wish well for people. And if they're not of that space and it becomes clear, like they don't even finish the class. Like I have no problem if I feel like there's someone there for any kind of unethical reason, or just that they're not in that place, or they're disruptive in any way. I have no problem saying, you know what, I'll give you your money back, partial refund, whatever, just we need to part ways. So really it's such a pleasure to work with such a supportive group of people. And then additionally, I like to add in, just like we were talking about before, like your great example of the record player with Akashic Records, like that would be the kind of thing that we play around with in the level 2 class, just more, I call them templates. So we'll look at like life paths, visualizing different kinds of paths for people and reading those. Will have lots of different techniques and approaches like that. And we'll get into kind of specialty areas like reading past lives and reading in the level 1 class, we learn how to read relationships. In the level 2 class, it would be more complex relationships like family relationships, or when like 3 people are involved and things like that. So it's really just getting into more complex areas.
That's so exciting. And we're about to sort of wind down a little bit, but I'd love for you to talk about some of the things you're working on now. So I know you're like sort of totally immersed in writing a new book. You're about to start up the next series of group classes. And did you finish your dissertation yet?
I'm almost done. I've got the discussion section to go. So I would say I'm probably about 4 hours away from finishing a pretty solid draft. So I'm happy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, that will be a big relief. And then I'm gonna start on a major exercise plan after that to lose all this weight I just gained.
I do a great workout on Saturdays. I'll send you the link. It's so good. The home workout. It's really, she's like, she knows her stuff. I love her. Like, and it's great. But what about?
And we have our course that we did a few years ago that we still have on audio course. And I'm going to sit down and listen to those recordings. Tell everyone what it's called, because we still got it.
Superpowers. Yeah, activate your psychic superpowers. It's on your site and my site. And basically what we did is took her first book, You Are Psychic, The Art of Clairvoyant Reading and Healing, and kind of packed it down into an 8-week program with the meditations recorded. So you can just easily listen to them and like get into that mode. And I find a lot of people like to start there. Like maybe they'll read the book and then they'll be like, oh, I don't know. And then they'll listen to that and then they'll just see how it fits. And if they feel like it's right for them, and then they take the next steps into like formal training programs.
Well, and then we also still have our webinar course, the recordings from that on Lose Weight, Feel Great.
Oh yeah, lose weight, get in shape, and heal your body with energy
So
work.
I'm gonna go listen to that one.
There's so much you can do with energy, guys, and we figured out some fun things that work that we both probably need to start doing. Again, yeah, I'm going to revisit that. We did a manifesting one too on your other book, the Freeing the Genie Within.
Yeah, and you know, with all of these exercises, that they're so useful and so helpful, but when you get away from them, you need reminders, you know, and I find people that, you know, come, a lot of people like to repeat classes. Like I have a policy where, you know, it's how you can't do this with one-on-one classes, but as easily, but with group classes, it's pretty easy to just let people retake the classes, you know, as long as there's room in them. And people will say, yeah, you know, especially if they stop practicing for a while, it's really helpful, you know, to get back in to just needing reminders. So we need reminders just constantly. You know, it's a lot of this stuff is not brand new. It's just reminders that we need to, if we want to create something in our lives, we need to sit there and visualize it, or, you know, there's exercises that we can do. I mean, sometimes physical action is necessary as well, but in coordination with that we can use our sense of visualization and intention setting and working with our emotions and bodies to call forth what we want in our lives. And a lot of times, I think for both of us, you know, we had that such an intense desire to learn how to be able to do these things. And then we attracted to us the right teachers, the right situations, you know, whatever resources were needed in order to be able to plug into those. And I don't know about you. I know when you were first working or started with all this, at least you had a job, but I remember you weren't very happy in that job, and it was your dream to be able to work for yourself. So it's so cool to see that, you know, you're there. For me, I was a single mom at the time and broke during a lot of the times where I really wanted to get training. And there were always, you know, situations, especially after I would sit there and visualize what I wanted to see manifest in my life. And, you know, the next day someone's calling or emailing or knocking on the door, you know, offering for me to go into a training, or, you know, giving me some kind of work I could do to make it all happen. So yeah, that's definitely what I know we both cover in our courses as well.
That's so cool. It's so important to think that too. It's not just about being psychic and knowing things that other people don't know. It's about knowing how to shift energy and work with energy and create miracles and help people blast through blocks. And while we're helping them, we're blasting through our own blocks. I just never realized how much I would grow spiritually in doing this. And it's like this extra gift to, I don't know, it's just like, it's hard to express just how incredible it really is.
Well,
You know,
the cool thing about clairvoyance is not only do the images that you call forth and work with, not, like you say, not only are they for reading, but they're also for healing and manifesting. So for example, if you see an image of, like, one technique that we both work with is flowers. So if you see a flower for someone and the flower, let's say it looks nasty, like it looks all shriveled up and, you know, gray, and there's petals missing. And if you probe that more, you get meaning for what that means for the person. But you can do a healing on it by, you can visualize, you can ask your clairvoyance what needs to change, and then you can visualize the flower getting bigger or, healing up in some way. And then the client can do that as well. That's just one example, but they could like put into it images that they want a new car so they could see a car in the inside of it, or they want a relationship so they could visualize the relationship that they'd like, not with a specific person, but with just whoever in the universe is available to them to match them with their intentions. And so you can play with these visuals and manipulate them and change them. And the visuals are the energetic representation of these things. And so it's without the visuals, you can still set intentions and you can say mantras or affirmations, and those are useful too. But there's something very, very powerful when you can add in these visuals, because you can, change them up. And of course, people are like, okay, well, that sounds like some interesting, mental exercises, but how do you know it's really working? Well, besides for the results, what will happen is when you're sitting across from someone or 1,000 miles away on the phone and you start to visualize, say, their flower changing or the colors of their aura around their body changing, they can feel it, right? So sometimes you see some dark energy in their throat and you don't even say anything, you just start to visualize it moving away. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, something's happening in my throat right now, or something's happening in my chest, as you're working there without having even said a word about it. And that's how we have confirmation that we're not just playing these nice little games in our imagination, that we're actually having an impact on someone else's energy field. And, with the work we do, it's not the only way to, do these things. There's lots of different healing modalities. So the most important thing, even if someone's never going to find their way into a class or into anything we're offering, is to know that there's lots of modalities out there that teach how to work with energy, less so with how to actually read energy. I would say, that's where I think we come in, that we have something unique to offer, but we're certainly not the only ones. There's lots of clairvoyant training schools around the world these days and other modalities. But whatever it is, energy is real. The ability to read it, to know what others are going through and thinking and feeling and processing that through our own bodies or through visuals or through hearing things. This stuff is real. And, if we're not consciously working with it, that doesn't mean it's not still operating in our lives. It just means that in a way it's unconsciously working through us. And sometimes we're going to benefit from that, but the less aware we are, the more it can have negative consequences. And so we just want to bring more awareness.
That's awesome. And this recording we're doing right now, guys, is in January. And Debra, you have a new set of classes starting. When do they start, and where can people go to sign up if they're interested or to get more info?
Yeah, thanks. Well, my website is debrakatz.com, DebraKatz. And
it's not like feline cats,
yes,
not like KTS, KATZ.
And there is a famous lawyer now who represented a woman in the Supreme Court hearings. And she, with Brett Kavanaugh, where she was accusing him of sexual molestation. And so the attorney was Debra Katz, who represented her. So if you just look up Debra Katz, you're going to find a very capable attorney if you need one. But she's probably not going to be able to help you with your psychic abilities. So look up Debra Lynne Katz or DebraKatz.com.
I'll put it below for you guys too. And I love that. Do you have a link you can send me to the beautiful trailer for your trilogy? Debra put all her 3 books into one big set, and her friend's daughter made a really beautiful trailer. I'd love to share that too if you want to send me that so people can look at it.
Yeah, that would be great.
So professional. Like, wow.
Yeah, that was made by my good friend Michelle Bolgat. She has a publicity business called Leave It to Michelle Media. She's actually available if anyone is looking for some publicity help. And her daughter made this really cool book trailer, and I'm so appreciative of it. They just offered out of the blue to make one. So yeah, so check that out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for coming here today, Deborah, too. It's so nice to have you, and hopefully maybe we can do this again.
Oh,
Um,
this was really fun, and it's just so cool that we can be here talking about this when, how we met 10 years ago. We're
Over 10 now.
Yeah,
That's good. I love
yeah, I don't know if either one of us imagined
it. I
that we
certainly
would be
do.
together doing this interview today. So pretty darn cool.
Great. Thank you. And thanks again, everybody. DebraKatz.com. You know me, it's just Krishanti.com. And that's it for today. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.